Let's go over the warm-up review. First question, how does having high cholesterol content in the plasma membrane affect the function of the plasma membrane? Well, high cholesterol content decreases membrane fluidity and it increases melting temperature. Next, what are the stages that an embryo goes through between conception and the development of an inner cell mass? So immediately after conception, you have a zygote. Then the next stage is the morula, which looks like a mulberry. And then when the inner cell mass develops, the embryo is called a blastocyst. And the last one, what are the differences between oligodendroglia and Schwann cells? These are both types of cells that myelinate neurons. Oligodendroglia are found in the CNS, and each cell myelinates multiple axons. Schwann cells are found in the peripheral nervous system, and each cell only myelinates one axon. And remember, peripheral nervous system axons are very long, so each axon has multiple Schwann cells myelinating it. All right, let's move on to the lecture.
Hello everyone and welcome to our Step 1 video on brain tumors. Now just like Arnold Schwarzenegger, you're probably hoping that that headache you have right now isn't a brain tumor. But don't worry, that persisting problem with your memory is probably just the stress of a career-defining test looming in the not-too-distant future. So there's really no need to incessantly check your DTRs, and please stop asking your friends to look at your tongue to see which way it is deviating. All right, so let's get going. We're talking about brain tumors, and first we're going to talk about adult brain tumors. Now, about 50% of brain tumors are primary, meaning they originate in the brain. Then the other 50% are metastases from other tumors. Now, which cancers are most likely to metastasize to the brain? Well, unfortunately, almost all of them, or at least it feels that way. You have to think about lung cancer, breast cancer, GI cancer, thyroid cancer, kidney cancer, GU, and even melanoma. Now, the majority of adult brain tumors are going to be supratentorial, and the majority of pediatric brain tumors are going to be infratentorial. It's kind of easy to remember that because adults are taller than kids, so their brain tumors are going to be higher, they're supra. Now, patients will present with headaches that persist over a long period of time, and they get worse over time as well. Patients may also present with symptoms that are associated with a mass effect of that tumor. That includes things like focal neurological defects, seizures, even altered mental status. And what type of imaging would you get to evaluate the presence of a brain tumor? Well, you're probably going to get an MRI. To look at soft tissue of the brain, MRI is going to be the best choice. If you're looking for blood in the brain, like say a stroke or something, you're probably going to choose something like a CT scan first. So what are the major causes or types of brain tumors in adults? Well, in adults, there's a great mnemonic that we've used for brain tumors, and it's MGM Studios. So the first M is for metastasis. Remember, it makes up, again, about 50% of those brain tumors. And then G is for glioblastoma. The second M is for meningioma. And the S for studios is going to be the schwannoma. And that's going to be the order of prevalence of those brain tumors as well. So let's go into more detail on these primary adult brain tumors. So first we have glioblastomas. So glioblastomas are the most common primary brain tumor in adults. It is a type of astrocytoma. So astrocytes are some of the most abundant cells in the brain, and they provide support to neurons and they help form the blood-brain barrier. Well, these can become cancerous, unfortunately, and they cause glioblastomas. And again, unfortunately, this has a very poor prognosis. Good thing to remember here. The life expectancy is anywhere from about 6 months to a year. It is rapidly progressive. In fact, Ted Kennedy actually had a glioblastoma. Now, the location of these tumors is primarily in the cerebral hemispheres, and these tumors are irregular masses with necrotic centers, and they're surrounded by edema. Now, astrocytes will stain with something called GFAP, and the classic sign of glioblastoma is going to be the pseudo-palisading pattern. So with pseudo-palisading necrosis or tumor cell arrangements, you have kind of like this snake-like arrangement of the tumor. So be able to recognize that. All right, that's it for glioblastoma. Next, we have meningioma. So meningioma is the second most common primary brain tumor. Now, this is a slowly growing tumor, usually benign, but sometimes it can be malignant. They originate in the arachnoid cells of the meninges and are located near the surfaces of the brain. So since these are tumors arising from the meninges, it's actually kind of easy to remember that they are found more in the peripheral aspects of the brain. Now, it is more common in women, and risk factors include radiation exposure. And then patients with neurofibromatosis type 2, they're going to have about 50% chance of developing at least one meningioma. Now, many meningiomas are asymptomatic, and if they are discovered, then often there's really no treatment that's even needed. But symptomatic meningiomas will be treated with radiosurgery or just traditional resection. Now on histology, you're going to see a whorled pattern. Also, you need to know that this tumor is associated with psammoma bodies. So psammoma bodies are laminated calcifications that look like rings on a tree. So be aware of psammoma bodies and how that is associated with meningioma. Now let's move on to schwannoma. So schwannoma is the third most common primary brain tumor in adults. These are benign nerve sheath tumors of Schwann cells. One type of schwannoma is the acoustic schwannoma, also referred to as the vestibular schwannoma or an acoustic neuroma. It has a lot of different names. Now, these tumors are often going to localize to cranial nerve 8, and patients will have tinnitus and hearing loss, and many will also have vertigo or at least some unsteady gait. Now, fortunately, these tumors are slow growing and are often resectable, and just about all schwannomas are going to be positive for a tumor marker named S100. Now, the bilateral acoustic schwannomas are found with neurofibromatosis type 2, so another brain tumor that is associated with neurofibromatosis type 2. And then next we have oligodendroglioma. So not as common as the first three primary brain tumors we just mentioned. The main thing to know about this one is the fried egg appearance. So what you have here is a perinuclear halo, also referred to as clearing of the cytoplasm around the nucleus. Now we see this in the coilocytes of HPV. They also have this perinuclear cytoplasmic clearing. And in seminomas, the testicular tumor seminoma can also have that perinuclear cytoplasmic clearing. So three different types of tumors, again, can have that very similar kind of fried egg cytoplasmic clearing appearance. Now, a student also gave us a great mnemonic that says, "Olego my ego," which reminds us of the fried egg appearance of the oligodendrocytes. And these are slow-growing tumors, again, and they're going to be found mostly in the frontal lobes. And then there's also pituitary adenomas, which classically secrete things like prolactin. This then leads to hypogonadism as a downstream effect. But you can also have pituitary adenomas that express other pituitary hormones, like maybe growth hormone, which causes acromegaly. Now, probably the only thing you really need about the pituitary adenoma is that on that prolactinoma is it can compress the optic chiasm, and you can get that really interesting bitemporal hemianopsia. Let's go on to the pediatric brain tumors. So childhood primary brain cancers. Remember, the majority of these are going to be infratentorial again. Now, another student, this one was from Memphis, suggested a mnemonic for the three most common pediatric brain tumors. This is kind of playing off the MGM studios for the adult brain tumors. It's Animal Kingdom, Magic Kingdom, Epcot. So that's going to stand for astrocytoma, medulloblastoma, and ependymoma. And then we actually have another mnemonic that actually adds on our last one that I kind of like too. It's called prepubescent minds eaten with cancer. And that's going to stand for the pilocytic astrocytoma, the medulloblastoma, the ependymoma, and then the craniopharyngioma. So use either one of those. So the first one we're going to talk about is our pilocytic astrocytoma. So this is the most common childhood primary brain tumor that we're going to see. So in adults, the most common brain tumor was a type of astrocytoma, again, called the glioblastoma. Well, in children, again, the most common primary brain tumor is another astrocytoma. So these tumors are located in the posterior fossa, and just like the glioblastoma, patients will have that elevated GFAP, which can be used as a tumor marker. Now, in this case, though, the prognosis is not nearly as bad as it was with the glioblastoma in adults. Now, under the microscope, you may see the Rosenthal fibers, and those Rosenthal fibers are eosinophilic corkscrew-looking fibers. Let's move on to the medulloblastoma. So the second most common primary brain tumor in children. The medulloblastoma is a malignant cerebellar tumor. And both medulloblastoma and ependymoma, which is we're going to talk about in just a minute, the third most common brain tumor, they're both known for compressing the fourth ventricle. So be aware of that. The medulloblastoma and the ependymoma in children can compress the fourth ventricle, causing a non-communicating hydrocephalus. Now, medulloblastoma is also associated with the Homer-Wright rosettes. So with Homer-Wright rosette, you have a circumferential pattern of cells around sort of a central tangle of fibrils. So you have this circle of cells, and in the middle of that circle, kind of a bunch of fibers or fibrils. That's going to be that Homer-Wright rosette. And then let's go on to the ependymomas. So ependymomas have perivascular pseudorosettes. So these are not the same thing as the Homer-Wright rosettes. A perivascular pseudorosette that you're going to see with the ependymoma is a radial, again, arrangement or a circular arrangement of tumor cells. But now in the center you have a vessel. So it's not just fibrils, it's an actual vessel. So I want you to definitely separate the two, the homocyte and the perivascular. Remember, homocyte is medulloblastoma. The perivascular is ependymoma. And the final one here, craniopharyngioma, the last childhood brain tumor to be aware of. So the craniopharyngioma also comes from Rathke's pouch. So just like we saw with the pituitary adenomas in adults potentially. So the craniopharyngioma, just like with pituitary adenomas, you can get the compression of the optic chiasm, and that's going to lead to bitemporal hemianopsia. And again, this is the most common childhood supratentorial tumor. Most of the other ones are going to be infra. All right, so we just covered some tough stuff. It's time for a new teaching segment called Game Show. I'm going to give you a series of descriptors, and you'll have to kind of yell out the type of brain tumor before the answer shows up on the screen. Yell especially loud if you're in the library. Let's get going. All right, first one here. Adult tumor, world pattern, Samoma bodies. That's going to be a meningioma. Next, we have pediatric brain tumor, fourth ventricle compression, perivascular rosettes. That's going to be an ependymoma. Next, we have S100 positive, associated with cranial nerve 8, and then neurofibromatosis type 2. That's going to be a schwannoma. Next, we have derived from Rathke's pouch, pediatric supratentorial tumor, bitemporal hemianopsia. That's going to be a craniopharyngioma. Next, we have bitemporal hemianopsia, amenorrhea with decreased libido, secretes prolactin. That's a prolactinoma. Next, staying with GFAP, pseudopalsating necrosis, number 1 in adults. That's going to be a glioblastoma. Next, we have elevated GFAP, Rosenthal fibers, and then number 1 PD tumor. That's going to be your pilocytic astrocytoma. Next, we have cerebellar tumor, fourth ventricle compression, homocyte rosettes. That's medulloblastoma. Next, we have slow-growing, frontal lobes, perinuclear cytoplasmic clearing. That's going to be oligodendroglioma. Okay, so that's it for the game show. If you got all those right, then you win our grand prize, an improved self-image. If you got some of those wrong, then you'll get another chance at the end of session quiz. All right, so let's move on to herniation syndrome. So if you have a brain tumor, if you have an epidural hematoma, or you have hydrocephalus, all those things can cause what's called a mass effect of the brain, and that extra mass inside the skull can actually cause herniation or movement of that brain in the wrong place. So what are some of the ways that you can herniate the brain? Well, you can have a cingulated or subfalcine herniation that goes under the falx cerebri. So here the innermost part of the frontal lobe is scraped kind of under part of that falx cerebri. Now this one actually doesn't cause as much pressure on the brain as some of the others, but you can compress the anterior cerebral artery. You can have a downward or transtentorial herniation, and that's also referred to as a central herniation. You can have an uncal herniation. So with an uncal herniation, you could have compression of the third cranial nerve. As you begin to compress the third cranial nerve, first you're going to lose the parasympathetic innervation to the pupil of the eye, and that's going to cause a dilated pupil. And then next, the eye will deviate down and out. Now also with uncal herniation, you have a contralateral homogeneous hemianopsia. You can also have ipsilateral paresis, and then direct hemorrhages in the paramedian arteries. And then you can also have herniation of the cerebellar tonsils into the foramen magnum. All right, guys, that's it for the video part. It's time for that end of session quiz. Try to answer those questions first, and then we'll go through those together. First question, what are the 3 most common primary brain tumors in adults? And then what are the 3 most common in children? So for adults, remember the mnemonic for the most common brain tumors was that MGM Studios. Now the first M is for metastasis, but that's not a primary brain tumor. That's a metastatic tumor from some other primary. So the most common primary brain tumor in adults is going to be that glioblastoma. It might have been referred to as glioblastoma multiforme in the past. Then the second M is for a meningioma. The S is for schwannoma. So the 3 most common primary brain tumors, not counting metastasis: glioblastoma, meningioma, schwannoma. And then in children, you have that pilocytic astrocytoma, the medulloblastoma, ependymoma, and then finally the craniopharyngioma. Next, which primary brain tumor fits the following descriptions? So we're going to do a bunch of descriptions again. So first we have pseudopalsating necrosis. Remember, that's glioblastoma. Neurofibromatosis type 2. Most common, it's going to be your schwannoma, but think of meningioma as well. Prolactinemia leading to galactorrhea, amenorrhea, and anovulation. That's going to be that pituitary adenoma, the prolactinoma more specifically. Next, we have psammoma bodies. That's going to be a meningioma. Fried egg appearance. That's going to be your oligodendroglioma or the oligomyego. Perivascular pseudo-rosettes. That's going to be the ependymoma. Bitemporal hemianopsia. That's going to be your pituitary adenoma pressing on the optic chiasm. Also, think in pediatric patients, the craniopharyngioma. Worst prognosis of any primary brain tumor, that's going to be your glioblastoma, fast tumor, a prognosis less than 6 months. Child with hydrocephalus, think about medulloblastoma and think about ependymoma. Homer right pseudorosettes is going to be the medulloblastoma. All right, guys, that brings us to the end of our video. I hope you learned something. I'll see you next time.